Elira was a whisper in a world of roars. In the Nightfang pack, where a wolf's strength was measured by the ferocity of its snarl and the power of its shift, she was a silent. The word itself was a condemnation, a brand of shame seared into her soul since the day of her first failed transformation. While other children had burst forth in a flurry of fur and youthful energy, she had remained stubbornly, disappointingly human. Her inner wolf, a hollow echo where a beast should have been. The rejection was a constant, cold companion. It lived in the averted gazes of the pack elders, in the pitying glances from her older sister, Celine, and in the bitter disappointment that permanently etched her father's face. Her family, once respected, had fallen into disgrace, their lineage tainted by her perceived defect. They lived on the frayed edges of the territory in a cottage that sagged with the weight of their collective shame. Today, the shame was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. The summons had arrived at dawn, a scroll bearing the obsidian seal of the Alpha King. It was not a request, but a command. Every unmated female of shifting age was to present herself at the capital. The reason was unstated, but whispers slithered through the pack like smoke. King Darien, the Shadow King, was seeking a mate. The name alone was enough to chill the blood. He was a figure of terrifying legend, a king who had taken the throne after his parents' mysterious death, and had ruled from the shadows of his fortress ever since. He never attended festivals, never walked among his people. He was a phantom king, his power absolute, his presence a constant unseen threat. They said he was cruel, scarred, a monster who hid his face for a reason. "You must go," her father had said, his voice devoid of warmth. He had not looked at her, his eyes fixed on the chipped wood of their table. "It is the king's command. We cannot afford more dishonor." He meant she could not and afford to bring them more dishonor. Her very existence was a stain, and defying a royal edict would be catastrophic. Celine had helped her pack a small, threadbare bag. Her sister was everything. Elira was not strong, beautiful. Her silver wolf, a magnificent creature that ran with the pack's finest hunters. Yet there was no malice in her, only a deep, sorrowful pity that was almost worse than contempt. "Be careful, Elira," Celine had whispered, pressing a small, hand-carved wooden bird into her palm. "The capital is not like our village. And the king. The stories are dark." Anna clutched the bird, now its smooth wood a small comfort, as she stood in the crowded, muddy courtyard of the king's fortress. She was a drab sparrow in a flock of peacocks. The other females were dressed in their finest silks and velvets, their hair intricately braided with ribbons and jewels. They pined and postured, each one vying to be the most impressive, the most worthy. They were the daughters of alphas and betas, their bloodlines pure, their wolves strong. Anna wore a simple brown dress patched at the elbows. She had no jewels, no ribbons. She felt invisible, and for that, she was grateful. Her only hope was to be overlooked, dismissed, and sent home to her quiet life of being a disappointment in private. She kept her head down, her gaze fixed on the cracked cobblestones, trying to shrink into herself. The air crackled with a sudden tension. A hush fell over the chattering crowd. The great iron-banded doors of the keep swung open and two figures emerged. One was an older wolf, his face a mask of stern authority and disdain. His scent was sharp, aggressive. Lord Malric, the king's uncle and most trusted advisor, a notorious traditionalist. The second figure stole the breath from every lung in the courtyard. It was the king. He was not what she had expected. The legends had painted a picture of a gnarled beast, a monster hunched and hideous. But Alpha King Darien was tall and powerfully built, draped in black furs that seemed to drink the very light from the air. A high ornate collar framed a face that was brutally handsome, all sharp angles and severe lines. His hair was as black as a moonless night, and his eyes were the color of a winter storm, a piercing glacial gray that seemed to see everything and feel nothing. But there was something else, A strange cold emanated from him, a palpable aura of isolation and sorrow that clung to him like a shroud. Shadows seemed to deepen in his presence, to writhe at the edges of his form, as if they were alive. Lord Malric stepped forward. By decree of Alpha King Darien, a mate will be chosen. She who is selected will bring honor to her pack and secure the future of our kingdom. His gaze swept over the assembled females, dismissing Anna and the other lower-ranked wolves in an instant. The king did not speak. His stormy eyes scanned the crowd, his expression unreadable. He moved with a predator's grace, a silent, lethal power that made the air thick with fear. One by one, he passed the hopefuls, a flick of his gaze, a slight shake of his head, and their faces would fall crestfallen. He dismissed the strongest, the most beautiful, the ones whose bloodlines were impeccable. Confusion rippled through the ranks. Anna held her breath, praying he would not see her. "Please just pass me by. Let me go home." But then his movement stopped. He was standing before her. The world narrowed to the space between them. The cold radiating from him was intense, seeping into her bones. She could feel the raw, terrifying power thrumming just beneath his skin. She dared not look up, keeping her eyes fixed on the silver clasps of his boots. Silence stretched heavy and suffocating. The whispers of the crowd died. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, feel their shock and disbelief. Why had he stopped for the silent, the wolfless girl from a disgraced family? A deep voice, smoother and colder than she could have imagined, cut through the silence. "You." The single word was a physical blow. Anna's head snapped up against her will. She met his gaze and her heart stuttered. The stories were wrong. He was not a monster. He was something far more terrifying, a man utterly broken, his soul encased in ice. She saw a flicker of something in those gray depths, not cruelty, but a profound, bottomless pain. He looked at her not as a potential mate, but as a tool. His gaze was assessing, calculating. He saw her patched, her dress, her lack of adornment, her cowering posture. He saw her weakness, and for some reason she could not comprehend. That was what he wanted. He lifted a hand, and she flinched, but he only gestured to Lord Malric. A quiet word was exchanged too low for her to hear. Malric's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. He opened his mouth to protest, but a single glacial look from the king silenced him. Darien's gaze returned to Elira. His voice was a low command that borked no argument, echoing in the dead silence of the courtyard. "You are the one. You will come with me." Fear was a living thing, a frantic bird beating its wings against the cage of her ribs. Anna followed the Alpha King into the oppressive gloom of his fortress, her worn-out sandals slapping softly against the cold stone floors. Lord Malric trailed behind them, his fury a palpable heat at her back. The great doors boomed shut, plunging the hall into a twilight, pierced only by high, narrow windows that let in slivers of gray, unforgiving light. The castle was a mausoleum. Tapestries depicting glorious battles of the past were coated in a fine layer of dust, their vibrant colors muted to shades of gray. Suits of armor stood like silent, rusting sentinels along the walls. There was no warmth, no life, no sound but their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. It was the home of a man who was already a ghost. King Darien led her not to a throne room or a grand hall, but up a winding staircase into what was clearly his private study. The room was dominated by a massive oak desk and shelves overflowing with books and scrolls. A fire crackled in the hearth, but it did little to chase away the room's profound chill. The air was thick with the scent of old paper wood smoke and something else, a faint metallic tang like ozone after a lightning strike. He gestured to a simple wooden chair before the desk, then moved to stand before the fireplace, his back to her. He was a looming silhouette against the flames. My Lord Malric began, his voice tight with outrage. "You cannot be serious. This girl, she is a silent. Her family is disgraced. She has no wolf, no standing, no power. She is an insult to our bloodline." Darien did not turn. That is precisely why she was chosen. His voice was calm, but it held an undercurrent of steel that made Malric flinch. "I require a maiden name only. A placeholder. Someone who will not challenge me, who has no political ambitions of her own, whose family is too weak to leverage this union for their own gain. She is perfect. Anna's blood ran cold, a placeholder, a tool. She was not a person to him, but a solution to a problem. The humiliation was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was overshadowed by a primal fear. "Leave us," the king commanded, his tone final. Malric sputtered for a moment, his face turning a dangerous shade of red, but the king's authority was absolute. With a last venomous glare at Anna, the old wolf spun on his heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Anna sat rigidly in her chair, her hands clenched in her lap, the small wooden bird Selene had given her digging into her palm. Finally, Darian turned from the fire. His face was unreadable, a mask of cold control. He walked towards the desk and sat opposite her, the massive piece of furniture a barricade between them. "Let us be clear about the nature of this arrangement." He began, his voice low and even. "You will be my queen. You will live in this castle. You will attend the necessary functions, and you will present a convincing illusion of a mated pair to the world. You will be given fine clothes, warm food, and a comfortable life. In return, you will be obedient, discreet, and you will ask no questions." Her throat was dry and what of the bond, the mating? The words felt like ash in her mouth. A flicker of something dark and dangerous crossed his face. "There will be no bond. There will be no consummation. This is a political arrangement, nothing more." He leaned forward slightly, his storm gray eyes pinning her in place. The cold in the room intensified, and she saw them then, faint wispy tendrils of shadow coiling around his shoulders like smoke, with a mind of its own. They seemed to react to his emotions, darkening and thickening with the grimness of his tone. "I have one condition," he said, and his voice dropped to a near whisper, a sound more menacing than any shout. "It is the most important rule of this entire charade, and if you break it, the consequences will be severe. Do you understand?" She could only nod, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You will never touch me." The words hung in the air between them, stark and absolute. Her heart, which had been racing with fear, seemed to stop altogether for a moment before lurching back into a painful rhythm. Of all the things she had expected, this was not it. In their culture, the mating touch was sacred, the foundation of the bond that united a pair for life. To forbid it was unnatural, a violation of their deepest instincts. "Ever," he reiterated, his gaze burning with an intensity that terrified her. "Under no circumstances are you to lay a hand on me, and you will ensure that I never ever touch you. Is that clear?" "Yes, my king," she whispered, the title feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. He seemed to see the confusion and fear in her eyes, because a sliver of something that might have been weariness crossed his features. "This is for your own protection," he said. The words clipped. "This castle is my cage, girl. Do not forget that you are now in it with me." With that, he stood the audience clearly over. "A servant will show you to your chambers. They are in the opposite wing from my own. You will be brought what you need." He turned his back on her again, returning to his vigil by the fire. A solitary king guarding a secret she could not begin to comprehend. The shadows around him seemed to cling to him, a living cloak of darkness. Anna felt a strange, unwelcome pang of sympathy for the lonely, powerful man before her. It was quickly smothered by the overwhelming terror of her new reality. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage mated to a king who refused to touch her, a queen in name only. Her life was no longer her own. It belonged to the Shadow King and to the terrible secret reason he had for his one unbreakable condition. Anna's new chambers were as grand as they were desolate. They were a suite of rooms larger than her entire family cottage, furnished with a huge canopy bed, a velvet fainting couch, and a wardrobe filled with gowns of silk and brocade in colors she had only ever dreamed of. But like the rest of the castle, a film of disuse lay over everything. The air was stale, the furniture shrouded in a ghostly layer of dust. No one had lived here for a very long time. The days that followed bled into one another in a haze of suffocating loneliness. She saw the king only at the evening meal, a tense, silent affair in a cavernous dining hall. They sat at opposite ends of a long, polished table, the distance between them a yawning chasm. He never spoke, his attention fixed on his plate, his posture rigid. The shadows were always with him. Faint wisps that coiled at his collar and cuffs, a constant unsettling reminder of his strangeness. The rule "never touch me" was a silent third guest at their table every night. The castle staff treated her with a fearful difference. They were ghosts themselves, moving with quiet efficiency, their eyes always downcast. They answered her questions with clipped, polite responses, but offered no warmth, no conversation. She was their queen, but she was also the king's property, and they were clearly terrified of him. Desperate for a breath of fresh air, for something real and alive in this stone tomb, Anna began to explore. She found her way to the castle's courtyard gardens, or what was left of them. They had once been magnificent, she could tell. The layout was intricate, with stone pathways, tiered flower beds, and the skeleton of a large glass conservatory. But now it was a riot of neglect. Weeds choked the life from withered rose bushes. Ivy crawled unchecked over statues. And the conservatory glass was cracked and grimy. It was a reflection of the king himself, she thought. Something that had once held the promise of beauty, now left to ruin and decay. Alira had always had a gift, a secret she kept even from her family. It wasn't the strength of a wolf, but a quieter magic. She could feel the life force in plants, a gentle hum beneath the earth. She could coax seeds to sprout with a touch, could soothe the blight from a wilting leaf. It was a useless skill in a pack of warriors and hunters, another mark of her otherness, but here in this dead garden, it felt like a purpose. She started small. She found a pair of rusted shears in a forgotten shed and began to clear the weeds from a single rosebush. Her fingers, unused to such labor, were quickly raw and blistered, but she ignored the pain. As she worked, she hummed an old lullaby her mother used to sing, a simple, gentle tune. She focused on the tiny spark of life still lingering in the rose's roots, sending a silent, wordless encouragement to it. Live, she pleaded with it. Grow, she lost track of time, her world shrinking to the patch of dirt and the thorny stems in her hands. It was the first time she had felt anything other than fear and loneliness since arriving at the castle. From a high-shadowed window in his study, Darian watched her. He had been drawn by the faint, unfamiliar sound of humming. He stood back from the glass, a phantom observer, his hands clenched behind his back. He had expected her to weep, to rage, to grow sullen and bitter in her confinement. He had not expected this. He watched as the wolfless girl knelt in the dirt, her fine new dress stained with mud, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tended to a plant that was all but dead. He watched for hours. He saw the way she spoke to the plants in a low whisper, the gentle way she cleared the weeds as if not to disturb the soil too much. There was a quiet strength in her, a stubborn resilience that he had not anticipated. It was an unwelcome complication. She was supposed to be a simple, inanimate pawn. She was not supposed to be interesting. A sudden spike of anger from his uncle's unwanted visit earlier in the day caused a flicker in his control. A tendril of pure shadow, darker and colder than the rest, snaked down his arm. He clenched his fist, forcing it back under his skin. The curse was always there, a hungry beast waiting for a moment of weakness. His isolation was his only defense. His control was the only thing keeping everyone around him safe. He looked back down at the girl in the garden. She was life in his world of death, a small, stubborn flower pushing its way through cracked stone. And for the first time in a very long time, Darian felt a flicker of something other than pain and rage. It was a dangerous, unfamiliar emotion. Curiosity. He continued to watch her day after day. The single rosebush became a small patch of cleared earth. The patch grew into a bed. She found seeds in the conservatory and with painstaking care began to coax them to life in small clay pots. Life was slowly, stubbornly returning to his dead garden, all because of the silent, wolfless girl he had chosen for her weakness. One evening, as she was returning from the garden, her arms full of freshly cut, fragrant herbs, she discovered she almost ran into him in a dimly lit corridor. She gasped and stumbled back, dropping the herbs. The scent of lavender and mint filled the air. "My king," she stammered, her eyes wide with panic as she scrambled to gather the scattered stems. He stood perfectly still, his body rigid, the unexpected proximity, the fresh, clean scent of the herbs. It was an assault on his tightly controlled senses. The shadows around him thickened, a visible sign of his agitation. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice harsher than he intended. "The gardens," she whispered, not looking at him. "They were neglected. I thought I could help." He looked at her hands. They were covered in dirt, the nails broken, the knuckles scraped. They were the hands of a worker, not a queen. "You are the queen. This is not your work. It makes me feel less alone," she confessed. The words so quiet he barely heard them. Her honesty disarmed him. He had spent his entire life building walls, and this small, quiet girl was finding the cracks in them without even trying. He felt an irrational urge to reach out to brush a smudge of dirt from her cheek. The thought was so alarming, so dangerous, that he recoiled as if burned. The shadows around him writhed. "Stay away from me!" He snarled the words, a desperate defense. He did not wait for a reply, turning and stalking away down the corridor, his black cloak billowing behind him like a storm cloud. Anna was left kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the scent of lavender, her heart aching with a confusion she couldn't name. She had seen it again in his eyes just for a second. Not anger, but pure, unadulterated fear. The Shadow King, the monster of the legends, was afraid, and she was beginning to think he was not afraid of her but of himself. The encounter in the hallway shifted the atmosphere in the castle from one of silent tension to one of active avoidance. Darian made himself even scarcer, taking his meals in his study and ensuring their paths never crossed. Yet Anna knew he was still watching her. Sometimes when she was in the garden, she would feel a prickling on the back of her neck and would glance up at the high dark window of his study, catching a glimpse of a silhouette just before it disappeared. Her work in the garden became her sanctuary. Under her care, a miracle was unfolding. The rose bushes, once skeletal and brown, were now covered in lush green leaves and heavy with buds. The herb garden was thriving, its fragrance a gentle rebellion against the castle's musty decay. She had even managed to repair some of the panes in the conservatory, and inside tiny seedlings were pushing their way toward the light. The castle staff began to notice. One of the kitchen maids, a young woman named Lisette Shiley, approached her one afternoon. "Your Majesty." She began, her eyes downcast. The head cook was wondering, "Might we use some of your herbs? We haven't had fresh lavender in the kitchen since." "Well, for a long time." Anna's heart lifted. It was the first time anyone had spoken to her about something other than her immediate needs. "Of course," she said, her smile genuine. "Take whatever you need." Soon, small changes began to ripple through the fortress. The scent of fresh herbs drifted from the kitchens. A maid timidly placed a small vase of Anna's roses on the dining hall table. The food, once bland and functional, became more flavorful. They were small things, but in the oppressive stillness of the castle, they felt monumental. Life was seeping back into the stone walls, and it was flowing from her. The shift did not go unnoticed by Lord Malric. He saw her growing influence as a threat. He found her in the garden one morning where she was carefully transplanting young chamomile sprouts. "Enjoying your little hobby, are we?" He sneered, his presence casting a paw over the sunny morning. He kicked at a loose stone on the path. "You should be focused on your duties on providing the king with an heir." Elira stiffened her hands, freezing in the dirt. "The king has not. That is not part of our arrangement." Malric laughed, a harsh grating sound. "An arrangement, child. You are a broodmare, a deficient one at that. But your purpose is to secure the bloodline. Has he even touched you, or does his affliction prevent it?" The insinuation was slick with venom. "I do not know what you mean," Anna said, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Do not play the fool with me," he snarled, stepping closer. His scent was acrid domineering. "I have known him since he was a boy, I know his weakness. This curse he carries, this shadow, play it is a taint on our family. A king must be strong, pure. He hides in his castle, afraid of his own power. He chose you, a wolfless stray, because he is too weak to handle a real she-wolf. He thinks you are too powerless to expose him. Malric leaned down his face close to hers, but you will be his undoing. A queen who cannot give him an heir is useless, and a king who cannot produce one is no king at all. The council is already whispering, your failure will be his downfall, and I will be there to pick up the pieces. He straightened up, a cruel smile twisting his lips. Tend to your flowers, little queen. It is all you are good for. He strode away, leaving Anna kneeling in the dirt, his poisonous words echoing in her mind. So it was a curse, a physical affliction that explained the shadows, the cold, the desperate rule of no touching. He was afraid of harming someone. He was afraid of what he was. Instead of frightening her, the revelation solidified the strange sympathy she felt for Darian. His cruelty was a shield. His isolation was a prison he had built to protect others. Malric saw it as a weakness to be exploited, but Anna was beginning to see it as a terrible, lonely sacrifice. That night, she decided to act. She couldn't fight Malric with power or politics, but she had her own quiet magic. She spent hours in the herb garden carefully selecting plants known for their calming properties. Chamomile, valerian root, and a rare silvery leaf called moon petal, said to soothe troubled spirits. She brewed a fragrant, steaming tea, her intentions focused and clear as she stirred the infusion. Peace, she thought. Let him have a moment of peace. She brought the tray to his study herself. Ignoring the startled look from the guard at the door, she knocked softly. Go away, came the gruff reply. She took a deep breath. My king, I have brought you some tea. I thought it might help you rest. There was a long silence. Then leave it outside the door. It will get cold, she insisted gently. Another pause longer this time. She heard the scrape of a chair, then heavy footsteps. The door opened a crack. Darian's stormy eyes peered out, narrowed and suspicious. The shadows around him were agitated, writhing like a nest of snakes. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. He saw the simple porcelain cup on the tray, steam rising from it in a fragrant cloud. He looked at her earnest, worried face. No one had dared to approach his study at night for years. No one had ever brought him something they thought might bring him comfort. With a deep sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he opened the door wider. Fine. She entered the room, her heart pounding. She placed the tray on a small table near his desk. The room was a mess, scrolls and books scattered everywhere, a testament to a restless, troubled mind. What is this? He asked, his voice rough. It is just tea, she said softly. Chamomile and moon petal. It helps to calm the mind. She did not say the shadows, but he knew what she meant. He stared at the cup as if it might be poisoned. He had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted his power, who saw him as a title, not a person. Malric's manations, the council's demands, the fear in his subjects' eyes. It was a constant siege. And here was this girl offering a simple cup of tea, an act of pure, uncomplicated kindness. He did not thank her. He did not smile. He simply walked over to the table, picked up the cup, and took a sip. His eyes closed for a brief moment. The tense line of his jaw softened almost imperceptibly. The writhing shadows around his shoulders seemed to calm, settling into a gentle, flowing cloak. He looked at her, and for the first time his gaze held no anger, no calculation, only a profound, soul-deep weariness. You should not have come here. You seem troubled, she whispered. I am always troubled. He stated a flat, bitter truth. He took another sip of the tea. This was a foolish risk. I am not afraid of you, she said, and was surprised to find that it was true. A dark, humorless smile touched his lips. Then you are a fool. He turned away from her, then dismissing her with his posture, but as she slipped out of the room, she saw him lift the cup to his lips again. A solitary king finding a fleeting moment of peace in a simple gift from his placeholder queen. It was a tiny victory, but it felt like the beginning of a thaw in his long, cold winter. The nightly tea ritual became an unspoken agreement. Every evening, Anna would brew a calming infusion and bring it to his study. She would knock. He would let her in and she would place the tray on the table. Sometimes he would be there and they would exist in a shared tense silence for a few moments. Other times he would be absent and she would leave the tea for him to find. He never thanked her, but he always drank it. The empty cup left outside his door in the morning was her only acknowledgement. This fragile truce was shattered during a meeting of the Royal Council, as the new Queen Anna's presence was required a symbolic necessity. She sat on a smaller, less ornate throne beside Darian's, feeling like an imposter in her borrowed finery. The council was composed of old, grim-faced alphas from the most powerful packs, with Lord Malric at their head. The topic was a border dispute with a clan of rogue wolves to the north. Malric was advocating for an immediate, brutal retaliation. "We must show strength," he boomed, slamming a fist on the great stone table. "They encroach on our lands, steal our game. We must wipe them out, burn their dens to the ground as a warning to all others." Several of the other alphas grunted in agreement. It was the old way, the way of blood and dominance. Darian listened, his face an impassive mask. But Anna, who was growing attuned to the subtle shifts in his demeanor, saw the tightening of his jaw. She could see the shadows around him stirring, growing darker. "A full-scale attack will cost us too many warriors." Darian stated, his voice a low counterpoint to Malric's roar. "The rogues are desperate. Their lands are barren after the long winter. A show of force will only make them fight harder. It will be a bloody, protracted war. They are vermin." Malric spat. "And weakness only invites more aggression. Your father would have already sent the war packs, or has his son forgotten how to be a true alpha?" The jab was personal and it struck its mark. A visible tremor went through Darian. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. The shadows around him exploded outwards. No longer faint wisps, but thick, inky tendrils that snaked across the floor and up the walls. The torches in their sconces flickered wildly, casting dancing, monstrous shapes. The council members recoiled in terror, their chairs scraping against the stone as they scrambled back. They had heard whispers of the king's affliction, but to see it unleashed was something else entirely. Fear scented the air, thick and cloying. "You dare question my strength, uncle?" Darian's voice was no longer human. It was a low, resonant growl, layered with 100 whispering spectral echoes. His eyes glowed with a faint, silvery light. Malric had gone too far, and he knew it. He was pale, but a smug, triumphant look lingered in his eyes. This was what he wanted, for everyone to see the monster he believed Darian to be. The shadows thrashed, lashing out like whips. One shot towards Malric, who created back, raising his arms to shield his face. The other alphas were frozen in terror, their bravado gone, replaced by primal fear. Anna's heart pounded, but it was not with fear for herself. She saw Darian not as a monster, but as a man in agony, his control shattered, his curse raging. She saw the self-loathing and despair in his glowing eyes. Everyone else was backing away from him, but Anna stood up, ignoring the gasps of the council. She walked calmly from the dais. She moved not towards Darian, but towards a small table where a pitcher of water and goblets sat. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She poured a glass of water and walked to where she kept a small pouch of dried herbs at her belt. She crushed a handful of lavender and moon petal into her palm, the familiar, soothing scent rising into the air. She walked towards the center of the room, into the maelstrom of writhing shadows. They recoiled from her, hissing like steam on ice, but they did not touch her. Her lack of fear, her serene calm, was anathema to the raging, chaotic energy. "My king," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the spectral whispers. "Darian." He was panting, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his throne. His glowing eyes were fixed on her, a maelstrom of pain and fury. "They do not understand," she said softly, continuing to approach. "They see a monster because they are afraid, but I am not afraid." She held out her hand, palm up, showing him the crushed herbs. "This is not a weakness. It is a part of you. You do not have to fight it alone." The scent of the herbs reached him, a familiar comfort in the midst of his inner turmoil. Her voice, her calm, her impossible courage. It was an anchor in the storm. He focused on her on the impossible sight of her walking through the deadly manifestations of his curse, as if strolling through a garden. Slowly, painfully, the shadows began to recede. They bled back towards him, shrinking from their terrifying forms into the familiar wisps that clung to his clothes. The unnatural cold in the room lessened. The torches burned steadily once more. Darian slumped back in his throne, the silver glow fading from his eyes, leaving them dull with exhaustion. He was breathing heavily, sweat beading on his brow. He had pulled back from the edge, but it had taken everything he had and her. It had taken her. The council stared dumbfounded. They had just witnessed the king lose control and become a terrifying spectacle. But they had also witnessed the wolfless, silent queen walk into the heart of that storm and tame it with nothing but a few herbs and quiet words. Malric's face was a mask of thwarted fury. His plan had backfired spectacularly. He had meant to expose Darian as a monster, but instead, the event had somehow revealed a strange, powerful connection between the king and his unassuming mate. Darian's eyes met Anna's across the room. The vulnerability in them was raw, stark. He had been laid bare in front of his council, his deepest, most shameful secret exposed. But for the first time, someone had seen the monster and had not run. She had walked towards it. Without another word, he stood on shaky legs and swept from the room, the doors slamming shut behind him with a deafening boom. The council was left in stunned silence, their gazes shifting from the door he had disappeared through to the small, quiet queen who had just saved them all. Anna stood her ground, her heart aching for him, knowing that this revelation had changed everything. Later that night, a profound silence settled over the castle, heavier and more complete than usual. Anna knew Darian would not come for the evening meal. She knew he had locked himself away, stewing in the shame and fury of his public exposure. The thought of him alone in the dark with his pain was a physical ache in her chest. She brewed the tea, her hands steady, despite the turmoil inside her. This time she added a touch of honey, a small comfort. She carried the tray through the silent, echoing halls to his study. The guards who had witnessed the scene in the council chamber now looked at her with a new respect, a kind of awe. They stepped aside without a word. She knocked. There was no answer. "Darian," she called softly. "It's Elira, please. Silence." She tried the handle. It was unlocked. Her breath hitched. He had never left it unlocked before. Taking that as a fragile invitation, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark. The fire in the hearth reduced to smoldering embers. He was not at his desk. She saw him by the window, a dark silhouette against the moonlit glass. He was perfectly still, but the air around him vibrated with a contained, dangerous energy. The shadows were back, clinging to him like a second skin, thick and menacing. "You should not have come," he said, his voice a dead, hollow thing. He did not turn to look at her. "I brought your tea," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She set the tray down on the table, the clink of porcelain unnaturally loud in the silence. "I don't want it." "What happened today," she began, but he cut her off. "What happened today is that my council saw the truth." He bit out the words laced with self-loathing. They saw the monster their king truly is. All of Malric's whispers and rumors confirmed in an instant. They saw a king who is in pain, she corrected gently. They saw a king struggling with a burden they cannot comprehend. He finally turned, and the anguish on his face made her heart clench. The mask of cold indifference was gone, replaced by raw, naked vulnerability. "It is a curse, Elira. It has been in my bloodline for generations, a dark bargain my ancestor made for power. It passes to the firstborn son. It feeds on strong emotions, rage, grief, despair. My parents, they did not die in an accident. I killed them." The confession hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. "I was a boy," he continued, his voice breaking. "Barely 16, I had my first shift, and the curse awakened with it. We argued, my father and I, a stupid argument, but my rage, it was uncontrollable. The shadows erupted from me. I didn't know what they were. I couldn't stop them. By the time I regained my senses, he choked on the words, turning back to the window, his shoulders shaking. They were gone. The curse had consumed them. Elira felt tears well in her eyes. The monster of the legends was a boy who had lost his parents in the most horrific way imaginable. A boy forced to become a king, haunted by a power he could not control. His entire life since that day had been a penance. His isolation, his coldness, it was all a desperate attempt to keep the beast caged, to prevent it from ever hurting anyone again. "That is why I chose you," he whispered, his voice ragged. "I knew I could never have a real mate. I could never risk that. The bond would amplify everything. If I felt love, the curse would twist it. If I felt jealousy, it would become a murderous rage. And the touch, the physical contact, is what solidifies the link. It would give the curse a direct conduit to another person. I would destroy anyone I cared for. I chose you because you were weak, unassuming. I thought you would be easy to keep at a distance. I thought I could protect you by keeping you separate, by never touching me." She finished for him, the pieces clicking into place. It wasn't a rejection of her. It was a desperate act of protection. "I was wrong," he said, turning back to her. His eyes were shining with unshed tears. "You are not weak. You are the strongest person I have ever met. You walked into that storm today and you were not afraid. You quieted it. No one has ever been able to do that, not even me." He took a hesitant step towards her, then another. The shadows swirled around his feet, agitated by the storm of his emotions. "I do not understand it. Your presence, it soothes the beast. It's as if you are the antidote to my poison." He stopped just before her. The rule of their arrangement, a shimmering, invisible wall between them. He was so close she could feel the cold radiating from his skin, could see the intricate silver threads in his gray eyes. The urge to reach out to comfort him was a physical force, an overwhelming instinct she had to fight to suppress. "Darian," she breathed, her heart aching for him. "Don't," he whispered, his voice raw with desperation. "Please do not tempt me to break the one rule that keeps you safe." This was the turning point. This was the moment where everything shifted. He had confessed his deepest secret, shown her his most vulnerable self. He saw her not as a pawn, but as something more, something he was terrified of wanting, terrified of needing, and she saw him not as a king or a monster, but as a man who had been carrying an impossible burden all alone. Feelings were confessed not in words of love, but in a shared, terrifying honesty. The emotional climax was here in the dark of his study, with the truth finally laid bare between them. But the resolution was still a world away. Malric was still a threat. The council was in turmoil, and the curse was still a part of him, a loaded gun in the hands of his emotions. Their fragile connection was a tiny candle flame in the face of a gathering storm. The aftermath of the council meeting sent shockwaves through the capital. Rumors flew embellished with every telling. The king was a demon. The king was possessed. The new queen was a witch who held him in her thur. The kingdom, already unsettled by Darian's reclusive nature, was now teetering on the edge of panic. Lord Malric fanned the flames with practiced ease. He spoke in hushed, concerned tones to the other alphas, painting Darian's outburst, not as a momentary loss of control, but as a sign of his impending descent into madness. He framed Alira's intervention not as an act of courage, but as evidence of some dark, unnatural influence over the king. "He is unstable," Malric argued in a secret meeting of the most powerful pack leaders. "The curse of our bloodline has finally consumed him, and this silent girl he has brought into our midst. She is no true wolf. What magic does she wield to tame him? So it is unnatural. For the good of the kingdom, he must be set aside before he destroys us all." Darian was aware of his uncle's treason. His network of spies, though neglected, was still functional. But he was trapped. To move against Malric now would be seen as the act of a paranoid tyrant, confirming everyone's fears. He was paralyzed, forced to watch as his uncle turned his own counsel against him. Their fragile, newfound intimacy became Darian and Anna's only refuge. He no longer sent her away from his study. She would bring his tea, and she would stay sitting in the chair by the fire while he worked at his desk. They rarely spoke, but the silence was no longer tense or empty. It was a comfortable quiet, a shared solitude. Her presence was a balm to his frayed nerves, and the shadows, while always there, remained calm and subdued in her company. One evening, he looked up from a scroll, his eyes shadowed with worry. Malric is planning to make a move at the Blood Moon ceremony. Elira's blood ran cold. The Blood Moon ceremony was one of the oldest and most sacred shifter rituals, a time when the pack's bonds were renewed and the Alpha King's dominance was reaffirmed. It was a public event attended by all the major alphas and their packs. It was the perfect stage for a coup. "What will he do?" she asked. "He will challenge my authority," Darian said, his voice grim. "He will use my curse as proof of my unfitness to rule. He will demand I be deposed." The council would not dare. "They are scared." "Elira," he interrupted, "Malric is offering them a simple solution, a return to the old ways. They will follow him if they believe I am a threat to their stability." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of profound frustration. "I cannot fight him. If I show anger, if I unleash the curse, I prove him right. If I do nothing, I appear weak and confirm his accusations. He has me trapped." Anna looked at him, at the powerful king brought low by a battle he couldn't fight. She thought of her garden, of how she had brought life back, not with force, but with patience and gentle encouragement. Perhaps the same principle applied here. "Then don't fight him with force," she said softly. He looked at her, confused. "Don't fight him at all. Show them something else. Not the monster he wants them to see. Show them the king you truly are." "And what king is that?" he asked bitterly. "A broken man hiding in the shadows." "No," she insisted, standing and walking closer to his desk. She stopped a careful foot away, respecting the invisible barrier between them. "A king who has carried a terrible burden to protect his people. A king who has sacrificed his own happiness for their safety. A king who is strong enough to be vulnerable." He stared at her, a flicker of hope wearing with a lifetime of despair in his eyes. "They will not see it that way. Then we will make them see," she said, a fierce determination hardening her voice. "Malric wants to show them a monster. We will show them a man and his queen." For the first time, a genuine, albeit small smile touched Darian's lips. He had been alone in his fight for so long. The simple word "we" was a more powerful weapon than any army. In the days leading up to the ceremony, they made a choice that went against every instinct for survival Darian had. Instead of hiding, they defied convention. Darian emerged from his castle, with Anna by his side, always a careful, prescribed distance between them. He walked through the capital's marketplace. He spoke to merchants, listened to the concerns of the common folk. At first, the people were terrified. They shied away, averting their eyes from the fearsome Shadow King. But Anna's calm presence was disarming. She smiled at children, inquired about families, and her gentle nature seemed to create a protective buffer around the king. The people saw their quiet, unassuming queen who was not afraid, and their own fear began to lessen. They saw a king who did not roar and threaten, but who listened with a grave, thoughtful expression. It was not what they expected. Darian, for his part, found the experience both terrifying and strangely liberating. He felt the constant pull of the curse urging him to retreat into the safety of his fortress. But Anna's presence beside him was a steady anchor. He was risking everything, exposing himself to the world. But he was not doing it alone. He was rejecting the political marriage Malric had wanted for him, a union with a powerful Alpha's daughter. That would have been a strategic alliance. By appearing with Anna, by presenting her as his chosen mate, he was making a public act of defiance. He was choosing her, the silent, wolfless girl, over power and tradition. It was a sacrifice of political standing, a choice made for the woman who had seen his soul, not his title. It was a gamble that would either save his throne or cost him everything. The night of the Blood Moon ceremony arrived, cloaking the mountains in a crimson glow. The entire kingdom had gathered in the grand amphitheater, a vast open-air circle of stone carved into the mountainside. Torches burned brightly, casting flickering shadows that danced like frantic spirits. The air was thick with tension and the musky scent of thousands of wolves. Anna stood beside Darian on the central dais overlooking the sea of face. She wore a simple gown of deep blue, the color of twilight, a stark contrast to the blood-red banners that snapped in the wind. She felt a tremor in her hand and clenched it into a fist, hiding it in the folds of her dress. Darian stood tall and regal in his black ceremonial armor, but she could see the strain in the rigid set of his shoulders. The shadows around him were agitated, a constant, restless shimmer. Lord Vorlo stood with the Council of Alphas, his expression one of smug certainty. He had spent weeks sowing dissent, and tonight he would reap his reward. The ceremony began with ancient rituals, chants, and offerings to the moon goddess. Finally, the moment came. As tradition dictated, the Alpha King was to step forward and receive the ceremonial affirmation of loyalty from his alphas. But before Darian could move, Malric stepped forward, his voice booming across the amphitheater. "We cannot in good conscience pledge our loyalty to a king who is a danger to us all." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. This was open rebellion. Malric pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Darian. "We have all heard the stories. Many of us have now seen the truth with our own eyes. Our king is enthralled by a dark power, a curse that makes him a monster. He is unstable, unfit to rule. He hides a monstrous form, a beast of shadow, that threatens to consume him and our kingdom with him. He turned his venom on Elira, and he has taken this wolfless witch as his mate, a barren, silent girl who holds him in her thrar with unnatural means. He has rejected strong bloodlines and alliances for her. He is not thinking of the kingdom. He is lost to his madness." The crowd was in an uproar. Fear and confusion weared on their faces. The other alphas on the council looked at each other, their expressions grim. Malric's words, though treasonous, echoed their own deepest fears. Darian stood like a statue of ice, his face unreadable. Elira could feel the rage building in him, a volcanic pressure. The shadows around him thickened, beginning to coalesce into tangible forms. This was Malric's trap. He was goading Darian into an outburst to prove his point to the entire world. But Anna had seen this coming. She had a plan. She placed a hand on Darian's arm, a shocking, forbidden act. He flinched as if struck by lightning, his head snapping around to look at her, his eyes wide with panic. "Elira, no," he hissed, trying to pull away. The brief contact sent a jolt of icy, chaotic energy through her, but she held on. "Trust me," she whispered, her voice a low, urgent plea. She turned to face the crowd, her hand still on his arm, a visible symbol of their connection. Her voice, though not loud, carried a strange resonance in the sudden hush, a quiet strength that commanded attention. "You speak of curses and monsters, Lord Malric," she began. "But the only monster I see here is the one bred by fear and ambition. You say your king is weak. I say he is the strongest man I have ever known." She looked out at the faces of the crowd, meeting their eyes without flinching. "For years, your king has lived in isolation, not out of cruelty, but as a sacrifice. He carries a heavy burden, a power he did not ask for, and he has chosen to cage himself rather than risk harming a single one of you. He has borne this pain in silence." Alone, she squeezed Darian's arm gently. The shadows around him were still thrashing, but they were no longer expanding. Her touch, her calm, was acting as a dam against the flood of his rage. "You see his power as a curse," she continued, her voice rising with passion. "I see it as a part of him, just as the wolf is a part of you. It is not evil, it is just power. It is his fear, his pain, and the lies you have spread that twisted into something monstrous." Malric, seeing he was losing the crowd, grew desperate. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small, jagged obsidian shard. It pulsed with a malevolent purple light, a forbidden artifact drenched in dark magic. "You see, the witch defends him," he roared. "Let me show you the true face of your king." He pointed the artifact at Darian. A beam of sickening purple energy shot out and struck him in the chest. Darian roared, a sound of pure agony, not of a man, but of a beast. The shadows exploded from him. It was 1,000 times worse than in the council chamber. A tidal wave of darkness erupted, forming into a monstrous, shifting creature of nightmare, with glowing silver eyes and thrashing tendrils. The temperature plummeted, and a wave of pure terror washed over the amphitheater. Wolves and shifters cried out, scrambling back, trampling each other in their panic. The shadow beast, driven by the artifact's dark magic and Darian's agony, was a creature of pure, mindless rage. It was no longer under his control. It was the curse made manifest. It threw its head back and roared, the sound echoing with the whispers of 1,000 tormented souls. Malric smiled in triumph. He had his monster, the beast's glowing eyes, fixed on the nearest threat, the source of its pain. It turned on Malric, who lost his smile, his eyes widening in terror as he realized the creature he had unleashed would not obey him. But then its head snapped around. Its gaze fell upon Alira. She was still standing beside the now human-shaped void where Darian had been, her hand outstretched in the air where his arm had been. She was the one touching him, the one connected to him. The monster saw her as part of itself, and also as the most vulnerable part. Inside the raging storm, Darian was fighting. He had one last sliver of control, one last coherent thought: protect her. The shadow beast reared up, a massive tendril forming into a sharp spear-like point aimed directly at Anna's heart. With a final monumental act of will, Darian forced the creature to turn its rage inward. He chose to let the curse consume him, to self-destruct rather than allow it to harm her. The beast shuddered, turning on itself, tendrils lashing and tearing at its own shadowy form. It was going to rip itself apart and take Darian's soul with it. This was his ultimate choice, to sacrifice his own existence to save hers. "No!" Alira screamed, tears streaming down her face. She would not let him do this. She would not let him die for her. She finally understood. The curse fed on rage, on pain, on fear. Fighting it only made it stronger. She had to do the opposite. Ignoring the panicked screams of the crowd, she did the one thing he had forbidden, the one thing she knew she had to do. She ran forward straight into the heart of the raging, self-destructing shadow monster. She threw her arms around the epicenter of the storm, the place where she knew Darian's body was, and she held on tight. She pressed her face against his chest, a full-body embrace that shattered his one and only rule. The cold was absolute, a soul-deep chill that threatened to stop her heart. But she held on, and then she used her own unique magic, not the power to command or destroy, but the power to nurture. She closed her eyes and poured every ounce of her being into that touch. She did not send fear or pity. She sent love, pure, unconditional, unwavering love. She sent acceptance not just for the man, but for the shadows, for the curse, for every broken part of him. She sent hope. She sent the memory of the sun on the roses in her garden, the scent of lavender, the feeling of peace in their shared silence. "I am not afraid," she sent through their newfound connection. "I see all of you, and I love all of you. You are not a monster. You are my king. You are my mate." A blinding flash of silver-white light erupted from them, expanding outwards, washing over the entire amphitheater. It was not a violent explosion, but a gentle, cleansing wave. It was the light of a soul being made whole. When the light faded, the monstrous shadow beast was gone. Darian stood in the center of the dais. His black armor cracked and broken. The shadows were still there, but they were different. They no longer writhed with menace. They flowed around him like a cloak of living midnight calm and controlled. They were no longer a curse, but simply a part of him, integrated and tamed. A new immense power radiated from him, balanced and whole. Anna was still in his arms. He was holding her tightly, his face buried in her hair. He was warm. For the first time, his skin was not unnaturally cold. He was trembling not with rage, but with the sheer, overwhelming emotion of being touched, of being accepted for the first time in his life. He lifted his head and looked at her, his storm-gray eyes clear and full of a love so profound it stole her breath. The curse was broken not by destroying the darkness, but by embracing it with light. Her soft power, her love and acceptance had been the key all along. It had not been a battle. It had been a surrender. Silence, absolute and profound, fell over the amphitheater. The thousands of wolves who had been fleeing in terror now stood frozen, staring at the scene on the dais. They had witnessed their king become a monster, and then they had seen him transformed by the impossible courage of his queen. Darian slowly released Alira, though his hands lingered on her arms, a touch that was now filled with reverence instead of fear. He turned to face the stunned crowd, his new integrated power flowing around him, not as a threat, but as an undeniable aura of command. The shadows swirled at his command, forming into a solid, dark throne behind him. He did not need the stone one anymore. His gaze fell upon Malric. The old wolf was on his knees, the obsidian artifact shattered on the ground beside him, its power extinguished. His face was a mask of disbelief and terror. His ultimate weapon had failed, and his rebellion had crumbled to dust. Lord Malric. Darian's voice rang out clear and powerful, holding none of the spectral echoes of the curse, only the pure, resonant authority of a true king. You stand accused of high treason. You used forbidden magic against your king and endangered every soul in this kingdom, all for your own selfish ambition. You have sowed fear and division where there should be unity. He did not need to shout. Every word was a hammer blow of judgment. You preach of strength in the old ways, Darian continued, his eyes cold as steel. The old ways valued loyalty. They valued honor. You have neither. Your strength is a bully's rage, and your honor is a coward's lie. He raised a hand, and two of his royal guards, their faces filled with a new unwavering loyalty, moved to seize Malric. The other alphas, who had been on the verge of siding with the traitor, now stood silent and shamed, their gazes fixed on the ground. You are stripped of your title and your lands, Darian decreed. You will be exiled to the barren peaks to live out your days as the rogues you so despised. You will have no pack, no name. You will be a silent ghost forgotten by the world you sought to rule. Malric was dragged away, sputtering and cursing his words, lost in the vast silence of the amphitheater. The threat that had haunted Darian's reign was finally neutralized. Darian then turned his attention to the Council of Alphas. They flinched under his gaze, expecting punishment, perhaps even death for their wavering loyalty. "You let fear guide you," he said, his tone stern but not cruel. "You listened to the whispers of a traitor because you did not understand me. That is a mistake I will not allow to happen again. My reign will not be one of shadows and distance. It will be one of truth and transparency." He looked at Alira, and his expression softened, a warmth entering his eyes that stunned the onlookers. He held out his hand to her. "This is your queen. Her name is Anna. She's not a witch. She's not a placeholder. She possesses a strength that none of you could comprehend, a strength of heart, of courage, of compassion. It is this strength that saved me. It is this strength that will now help me lead you." He drew her to his side, his arm wrapping around her waist in a gesture of proud possession. "Our kingdom will no longer define strength by the sharpness of a claw or the power of a snarl alone. We will value courage in all its forms. We will value loyalty born of love, not fear. We will be a kingdom that heals, that nurtures, that endures. This is the new way." He then looked down at Anna, his voice dropping so only she could hear. And now for the most important tradition of the night. Before she could ask what he meant, he lowered his head, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was both a promise and a proclamation. It was a kiss of fire and shadow of a winter storm, meeting the gentle warmth of spring. It was a kiss that sealed their bond in front of the entire world. The crowd, which had been holding its collective breath, erupted. A single wolf let out a joyous hulsa, and it was answered by another and another, until the entire amphitheater was filled with the sound of 1,000 wolves howling their approval, their loyalty, their joy to the moon, and their newfound king and queen. As they finally broke the kiss, Darian leaned his forehead against hers. "There is one more thing," he murmured, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. With a grace that was both feral and tender, he bent his head and gently bit the juncture of her neck and shoulder. A jolt of pure ecstatic energy surged through Anna, a golden light that intertwined with his shadows, sealing their souls together, the mating mark. It was not a brand of ownership, but a symbol of their unity, a mark that declared to the world that the silent girl was the maid of the Shadow King, and that together they were whole. The harsh culture of the Nightfang Pack began its transformation that night. They had seen a different kind of power, a quiet resilience that had triumphed over brute force and dark magic. Their prejudices, their rigid definitions of strength had been shattered. In their place, a seed of hope had been planted, a hope for a kingdom ruled not just by power, but by compassion. A kingdom healed by the love of a king who had mastered his shadows and a queen who had taught him the strength of the light. 1 year later, the fortress of the Alpha King was unrecognizable. The oppressive gloom was gone, replaced by light and life. The dusty tapestries had been cleaned, their vibrant colors restored, and the halls were filled with the scent of fresh flowers and baking bread. The castle was no longer a prison, but a home. The biggest change was in the gardens. Under Queen Anna's devoted care, they had become a wonder of the kingdom. They were a breathtaking explosion of color and life, with blooming roses of every shade, fragrant herb gardens, and a grand conservatory teeming with exotic plants. It was her sanctuary, but it was also a symbol of the entire kingdom's renewal. Prosperity had returned to the lands, the harsh traditions softening under the compassionate rule of the new king and queen. Darien was no longer the Shadow King. To his people, he was simply King Darien, or more often just Darien. He ruled with a wisdom and fairness that earned him not fear, but a deep and abiding love. He walked among his people freely, his shadows a calm and gentle presence that no longer caused terror. Children would often tug on his dark cloak, and he would smile a real warm smile that reached his storm-gray eyes and lift them into his arms. He had learned that true strength was not in isolation, but in connection. He found Anna in the conservatory humming softly to a row of delicate orchids. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. The touch was still a miracle to him, a gift he never took for granted. "They're beautiful," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "They just needed a little encouragement," she replied, leaning back against his solid chest. She turned her head to kiss him, a soft, familiar gesture that still made his heart race. His gaze dropped to the gentle swell of her belly, visible beneath her simple linen dress. He placed a hand over it, a look of profound awe on his face. "And how is our little sprout strong?" she said with a laugh. "I think he has his father's kick." The news of the queen's pregnancy had been a cause for joyous celebration throughout the kingdom. The wolfless, barren girl was carrying the heir to the throne, a final definitive rebuke to all the old prejudices. Their child, the healer said, was a miracle, a perfect fusion of their spirits. Malric would be furious. Darien mused, a hint of dark humor in his voice. News from the barren peaks was scarce, but the last anyone had heard. The disgraced lord was a bitter, lonely old man, haunted by the ghosts of his own ambition. "Let him be," Anna said softly. "He's a part of the past. We are the future." Darien turned her in his arms, his gaze intense. "I was a ghost, a monster hiding in a cage of my own making. You walked into my darkness and showed me the sun, Elira. You saved me. You saved yourself," she corrected, tracing the line of his jaw. "You made the choice to protect me, to sacrifice yourself. I just held up a mirror and showed you the man who was already there." He smiled and kissed her again deeply and without reservation. Their love had not only healed a man and broken a curse, it had healed a kingdom. The whisper had taught the roars a new song, one of hope, acceptance, and love. And as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the flourishing gardens, the king and his queen stood together, their united shadows stretching long before them, ready to welcome the new life that was their legacy.